Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Landscape Photography. Tonight we are joined by Mr. Timothy Wrate. We're very excited to have Tim join us.
Hello, everybody.
And Tim is an absolutely fantastic aerial photographer. I guess you could say that it's a passion that's really brewed for a while, and Tim's just gotten into it with all guns blazing, I suppose, if you could put it that way. So, he's got a brilliant presentation tonight that he's prepared, and I can tell you that you guys are really in for a treat, that's for sure. So how's your week been, guys? Have you been able to do any shooting or anything like that?
Well, I just today started me waking up to live videos of Tom Putt flying and doing aerial shooting in the Northern Territory. So I was just like, hey, how's that for timing? And we've had Tim on the radar for quite some time, and he's done a really amazing sort of semi-exploratory trip up there that we're going to sort of be digging into. And you know, a trip like this takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of guts, it takes a bit of courage, there's a lot of risk involved, and there's a lot of moolah involved. So it's a trip like this, and I've done plenty myself, can set you up editing for a year potentially afterwards, sometimes longer, I find. In fact, I was just delving through a few this afternoon just to maybe chuck into the back end of the show, just going, oh my God, I feel like I just scratched the surface on my edit, and it was a year ago. So it's just like very, very productive form of photography. Yeah, so I've just spent most of the week judging Silver Linings Awards. So congratulations and apologies to all those people I'm not going to tell you whose images I judged. I have no idea if you got any in there, Tim. Do you have any in there?
Yeah, about 3 or 4 of the ones that I'll take you through.
What about you, Loki?
I put in about 3 or 4 as well, I think. So thought I'd throw my hat in the ring.
I haven't got any checks in the mail, boys. You know what's going on.
You know, it wouldn't be that much anyway, I'm guessing. So
to answer your question, Loki, I haven't shot since this trip.
All right.
Beautiful new daughter, Olivia, who we welcomed into the world in January.
Oh, congratulations.
So a lot of my time has been taken up by changing dirty nappies and trying to rock her to sleep. So I don't think I'll get another opportunity for a little time yet. So I'm busy.
Keep working on that, Tim.
I've got a couple of plans. I know what you're talking about.
Well, I think that is the beauty of aerials and how you can get a lot of, I guess, great images in maybe even just a handful of flights. And so you can kind of have that family time, and then have a bit of time where you can sneak away for maybe a few days and really execute on some plans that you've been able to make over that time, and still be very fulfilled photographically, and have plenty of material to edit over that time.
You've hit the nail on the head, Luke.
Yeah.
It's a huge reason why I do it is the fact that, you know, I've been shooting now for about 15 years. An enthusiastic. I absolutely love my photography, but you know, having a family, I do have priorities, and the fact that I can now schedule a couple of trips away each year, for even a couple of days. If I can get a couple of flights scheduled, that might mean that I, can come away with, for example, this recent trip that I did up into the Northern Territory, I came away with 4,000 images, of which I'll probably take you through close to 50 of them tonight. So in terms of bang for buck, it's certainly, in terms of the time that I can invest into my passion, it's one of the reasons why I'm very keen on aerial photography.
And I guess you could say, there's obviously a huge cost in terms of hiring out your own aircraft and things like that to take the images. But if you were to have been traveling that whole time, maybe shooting on the ground instead, and getting to all sorts of different locations, you would have still spent quite a bit of money anyway. So I think, that's one way you could probably justify it as well.
There's all sorts of ways you can justify aerial photography.
Yeah. How do you justify it to your partner Tim?
She knows that I'd be a very different person if I couldn't express myself through my passion. So she's incredibly supportive.
And I'd have to imagine too, when she actually sees the work that you put out, it's not like you don't have any evidence of all the hard work. That's for sure.
She's my harshest critic, mate. That shit. No, she's incredibly supportive. I'm very lucky to be with Jess. She's an incredible woman, and she knows that this means a huge amount to me, and lets me top out our credit card a couple of times a year.
Awesome.
So who would you say were some of your main influences, if any?
Well, you put yourself up on a pedestal a little bit, Paul, and I'd put you in kind of in that echelon of people. We've been able to spend a little bit of time together, and I'd like to think that we'll be able to spend a lot more time together in the next few years.
But he's a master of flattery. I'll just let you know.
So I'm answering your question by throwing it back at you and saying, Paul, you're one of my inspirations. Beyond that, I think there's a group of us aerial photographers, that is really led by Tony Hewitt, and the incredible work that he puts out. His Girt by Sea project is just the single most impressive pieces of work that I've seen from any photographer, hands down, anywhere. But that's shortly followed by a long list of what I would consider our colleagues in terms of aerial photographers. That list is probably too long to mention, but they know who they are, I guess. And
you can throw a few names out, mate. Why not?
Oh, there's Mika, there's Tom, yourself, Chris, Scotty. Oh, look, it's a really supportive.
Bob, Larry, John,
friendly.
Dick.
Oh, the list goes on and on.
Well, that's Australian-based photographers. Do you have any sort of international influences?
Not really.
Or,
no, it's been very domestically based in terms of my influence. It's probably part of my heritage, part of my interest. No, I've been very much focused on Australia. I haven't shot overseas for quite some time. I'm really keen on exploring our own backyard before I go much further.
Do you think that's to a certain degree speaks to the caliber of the work that does come out of Australia anyway? That you
absolutely,
sort of,
yeah. The aerial work coming out of Australia is the best in the world.
And what do you think would happen if Western Australia didn't have any aerial photography? Would there be anywhere else to shoot, or is it
Well,
South Australia.
I think everyone would be shooting in the top end, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. It's true.
Yeah, top end's pretty up there.
Oh, look, there's South Australia. There's some pretty cool places in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria. They've got pink lakes in Victoria, and everyone thinks that Hutt Lagoon's the place to go. So all you need to do is open up your mind, and you can find things everywhere.
Yeah,
definitely. Oh yeah.
And I guess we're talking about aerials. Is it everything that you do from either a heli or a plane, or do you also get into drone photography as well?
No, I don't have a drone. I haven't had really the time to invest into learning how to fly. Like I said, I've got a young family, and my passion is really, being able to enjoy the experience of being in an aircraft as well as shooting from the aircraft. So, I wouldn't never say never. And with the ever improving technology that's coming in drones, absolutely, I'd be keen on exploring it further. But yeah, I just haven't had the time to invest in myself. I'm trying to balance a full-time career as well as, build my photography as well. So yeah, I just haven't had the time to learn it.
That's definitely
you probably know Scotty and I. So I sat on the fence for years and just said we don't want anything to do with an annoying insect like sounds buzzing around people's heads and low resolution photographs. But we bit the bullet and went on a huge road trip early last year, just pre-COVID, for 3,000 kilometers, and just shot the pichingas about everything we could find. And funny enough, I saw a post from Scotty today. Luke, you might be interested in this. He said there's some new AI technology that's come out in Photoshop that is massively upscaled the resolution capacity in the drones.
Yeah, that's the new enhanced details sort of rebooted. And I think the enhanced details filter in Camera Raw kind of gave it a bit more sharpness and detail that way. But the new filter actually uses AI, I think, to upsize the picture as well. And I just did a test myself this evening on a Mavic file, and it went from like 20 odd megapixels to about 79 megapixels. So it was quite a big increase in file size. I guess that's really opening up. It's particularly good for drones where you know sometimes the resolution is kind of pushing the limits for what you're trying to achieve, especially if you're wanting to do a bit larger prints from a drone photo. Of course, the other option you've always got with that is just to do a panorama and increase the resolution that way. But yeah, it's definitely good to have that sort of technology. And one of the questions I had about that, it would be, should you edit all of your photos with that from the start? Because you kind of have to do that at the start of the process. If you're going to pull that into Photoshop down the track, well, if you don't do it and then put it into Photoshop, I guess you could probably use the camera raw filter in Photoshop. I'm not sure. So yeah, there's a few things to suss out there, I suppose, but there's probably an optimal workfall to do that.
Well, I'm looking forward to exploring to see what we can do with 100 megapixels upscaling by.
Or the other side too. If you like something and you really want to crop in, you can actually then still upsize the cropped part and still be able to get something decent out of that too. So there's a few different ways you could approach that. So yeah, it's always good to have this new technology and making it easier for ourselves. I guess you still need to start off with a good file though, if it's garbage in, garbage out with that sort of thing. So
what's your excitement about the opposite? What gets you going about flying? The experience of it, the physicality of it,
I'll touch on this a little bit later. So for me, it's really personal, and I think when we did the aerial special, I touched on it. My grandfather used to fly in a Skylark 175 Cessna. So some of my earliest memories were flying in his Cessna 175. He was a farmer, and on his front paddock, he had a rural runway cut in, and a windsock, a yellow windsock. And some of my earliest memories from kind of 3 or 4 years old were being in the passenger seat, going for a fly around the farm, and seeing all the paddocks from the air and seeing the cattle from the air, and they look like ants from above. So for me, I've always been obsessed with photography as far as I can remember. I've only really quite recently kind of joined the aerial photography craze. My first flight was in 2018, but the minute I stepped into that light aircraft, it was just like all those memories came rushing back. The minute that the propeller coughed to life, and you could really get that surge of adrenaline the minute you're kind of rushing down the runway. So for me, it's really personal.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to watch your journey, Tim, because I've known you for a long time and consider you a very dear friend. And I know that you're extremely passionate about your panoramic images, mainly with film, and it's quite a transition from a lot of, I guess you could say, ground-based film panoramas and then sort of more digital panoramas. And now, have you considered doing sort of panoramics from the air as well?
I haven't really. I guess my photography journey has really been part and parcel with my, I guess, personal life experience, where I've been over the past 15 years. So I was deeply involved in analog photography, and I was shooting on film until into 2015. So I was shooting on slide film transparency on a medium format, GFX, not GFX, GX617. So I'm still a Fuji boy. And a lot of that early days was down in the Australian high country, in both Victoria and New South Wales. And again, that was quite a personal experience. I used to go camping down there as a kid. So a lot of my photography in my adulthood is, I guess, just an adult representation or an incarnation of some experiences that I had as a kid. But what I find most appealing these days is not necessarily shooting panoramas from the air and trying to blend the two styles of photography that I've really kind of thrown myself into. But aerial photography really can kind of, it's almost like spatial mapping. You can get in the air and you can find some really cool things. It's almost exploratory in terms of trying to find certain features, and you can really emphasize things like contrast and texture, shape, pattern, etc., in terms of what you find. So I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. I don't really necessarily think that I'll change too far away from what I've been doing recently. And yeah, the more abstract, I guess my aerial photography is only becoming more and more abstract.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's really working for you. So why change when you're on a good thing? What was I going to ask? Oh dear. I think it was just around in terms of your planning, and when we had the aerial special, we had a really great little presentation on planning. How much of the shoots that you do you feel are kind of, you have a pretty good idea of where to go, and you know, you can sort of, because you've done that sort of almost pre-visualization, I guess, from Google Maps, and I guess, you know, and on top of that, how does it feel when you visualize it and then it actually comes to reality, or maybe even better?
I think a lot of the time you'll never pre-visualize things that you see from the air, because a lot of the landscapes that, you know, Paul and myself photograph from the air are so ephemeral that you may have seen something like it, or something that may allude to what it might look like from, you know, Google Earth or Zoom Earth or whatever tools you use. But often reality is magnified when you're in the air, and you can find some pretty cool things. So I do a lot of research for my aerial photography, but more of a general indication of where I want to fly and the types of things I might find when I'm in the air. But when I'm in the air, I let my eye do the talking, and I if we find some cool things between the pilot and the shooter, then, you know, go for it and explore that.
And do you I guess a lot of it's very seasonal too. Do you is that part of the research too, in terms of actually working out what time of year you should actually be there to start with?
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably the most significant part of the research that I do, is try and correlate things like tide and season to images that you might see from satellite, just to get an idea of what the conditions might be like, and therefore what conditions I want to see when I'm flying, that, you know, I might encounter when I'm in the air. So I've put a little bit of that into the presentation. So I don't want to really, cover off on it again. So we might as well probably jump in.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Up.
You can ask questions as we go anyway.
Yeah, cool. So
Tim, just
oh
make
yeah,
sure
I just
you
need to
into
make
the
you a
microphone,
co-host,
mate.
so I'm sorry about that.
You don't drop out.
Sorry?
Oh, just make sure you're speaking to the microphone because you drop out a little bit.
Okay. Is that better?
Should be able to be all set there to share, Tim.
Rocking the co-host thing.
Yep.
One participant can share at a time. Share screen. Share.
There we go.
Rock and roll.
Booyah.
Rock and roll. Okay,
Nice
guys. So, I guess we haven't even gone there yet. I was fortunate enough to explore, I have a couple of flights exploring some remote areas in the top end in November last year.
So for an international guest, what's top end? Where's that?
The top end is a colloquial term, I guess, that you'd use to describe an area from Darwin east across to the Arnhem Land.
Arnhem Land, yeah.
And then down all the way into, I guess, the western Gulf of Carpentaria. So it's the top half of the Northern Territory, really.
Top half, yeah. So would Catherine still be in the top half?
Well, yeah, it's definitely in the top half.
Yeah.
And I would suspect, I suspect the locals would consider them to be in the top end. So.
Yeah, it's also this triangle between Catherine and Darwin and Jabiru that I find is a very cyclic kind of point around that area, on land especially, and partly in the air.
I always think tropical when I hear the term as well, like more of the tropical part of NT, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I guess for people that don't know so much about Australia, I mean, 80% of it's desert, and you know, some people just think of, you know, the further north you go, the more deserty it gets, but it's transitions at a certain point into, as Luke was suggesting, a subtropical kind of area where it's actually really moist and warm at the same time, and in that environment, life just absolutely explodes just everywhere. It's one of the most intense places I've been in terms of noise and animals and insects and flora, and it's quite overpowering, almost a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
It's almost like
it really is, yeah. And you can understand why it's been such a hotbed, and I guess almost a cultural home for a lot of the Indigenous in the area. You know, it's got a very deep, rich First Nation history that I guess is probably one of the most thriving current cultural experiences you could experience when you go out there. It's really deep and it's really powerful and meaning. You know, I guess, well, it's very difficult to put into words, but it's very powerful, that's for sure.
So just to jump in there's actually a film currently out called Higher Ground, and it's actually filmed all through Kakadu National Park and West Arnhem Land. And on that note, it was so striking to me to have such a visceral feeling of the people living traditionally on land in that country and just how natural it looked and felt. Like, I understand the concept of it, but when you actually, you know, see them, you know, running huge big journeys on barefoot through country, and the way they hunt and what they see and how they interact with the landscape, they look so incredibly naturalized in there. It was a really powerful experience for me to see that, because I mean, that was a little bit before, you know, I'm arriving as an overseas visitor, and I never really got to experience, you know, the traditional side of the way this culture of people have, you know, it's constant, the longest living culture in history, arguably, you know, in this wild, extreme landscape. And it was just this immersion in the reality of it, and just how and the normalization of it, and just how beautiful it was.
I've got a little bit in the presentation towards, I guess, the second half, where I've tried to draw similarities between some of the local Indigenous art and what I saw from the air. Now, I'm not by any means suggesting anything in by doing that. All I'm saying is the deep-rooted nature of the relationship of the First Nations and Indigenous people with their home country. It really struck me. It really struck a chord with me when I looked at the local art, and then I reflected on my photographs and went, holy hell, you know, this is deep. That's really special, because not only are the colors the exact same, but a lot of the textures and patterns are as well.
I mean, I'm super fascinated about that, Tim. Like, I mean, how is that possible that this culture of people that live on the flattest continent on the planet have so much artwork that's from an aerial perspective, when they never physically could have ever had that? You know,
I wish I had an answer to that question. It really.
Well, I've actually, you know, say the Katitunda Lake Air project. You know, we actually went on Koori radio, and we had elders coming and looking through the book, and they were like, you know, had the hairs on the back of the neck, saying, "Oh, you got sacred country here, brother." And you know, I actually asked, "Well, how do you see this?" And one of the elders like, "Oh, it's easy, bro. We travel in our dreams.
Yeah.
We walk country, you know, we astral travel, basically, is what they're saying." And I was, you know, like, it was the most normal thing in the world. And I was like, wow, amazing. You know, imagine that. That's something to sort of blow your mind a little bit, and explains a lot of things, though, potentially.
I might race on before we get too carried away into the conversation, because I guess I'm just acknowledging that perhaps some of the audience may not know who I am. So I'll just kind of briefly introduce myself. First things first, I want to thank you both, and Nick, for providing me the opportunity to present to you guys tonight.
Yeah, cheers, Nick. Sorry you couldn't be here, mate.
I'm in awe of the community that you guys have built. I've been following from day one. I've spent a lot of Wednesday nights tied to my laptop. I think what you guys are doing is really, really special, and I just want to say on behalf of everyone that's been watching, thanks for doing so, and long may it continue.
I appreciate that, Tim.
The biggest gift anyone can give you is their time. So not only thanks to you guys, but thanks to everyone that's tuning in tonight. And hopefully you can leave tonight's presentation with a little bit more kind of context and a little bit more room in your heart for kind of exploration and understanding of how special our country is. So first things first about me, and I just might move this. That's my beautiful family. I've got two beautiful daughters. Sophie's 2.5 and Olivia's just gone 2 months. They're a big reason of why I do what I do. I'm really lucky to have such a supportive wife in Jess, and Sophie's only 2.5, but she's already obsessed with photo. So I can't wait to inaugurate her into the world of photography, and hopefully she's more of a landscape photographer rather than taking selfies of herself.
Has she got a toy camera yet?
Not yet, but in the park next to our house, there's a telescope. She thinks it's a camera, so whenever she looks at the telescope, she's taking photos.
Fabulous.
Like Daddy. So yeah,
Awesome.
that warms my heart. The bottom photograph there is my grandfather's Cessna 175 that I kind of grew up when I was spending time on his farm, flying around. I was either on his lap or on the front seat or on the back seat. And the top photograph there, Luke's probably seen 3 or 4 times, but that's me reading my first Australian Geographic, and that's a photograph that I like to reflect on. Given now I've had works published by them alongside Luke. Thank you very much, Luke. And every time that I've either been awarded, as a finalist in their competitions or been published in their magazine, that's a photograph I like to reflect on and say.
Looks like there's a patermillion on the front of that
magazine. It's a thylacine, mate.
I was going to say thylacine, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just.
Well, you're talking about my sister's. I thought you were talking about my sister's velvet jumpsuit, mate.
Oh dear. All right.
So I know we touched on pre-trip trip planning before, but I just wanted to really touch on this. I'm a chartered accountant by training. I work in the corporate world, so a lot of this stuff may seem kind of corporate mumbo jumbo a little bit. But before my trips, I just like to define what I'm trying to achieve. And I like to think that helps me, have a clear understanding of what I want to photograph, and then hopefully that comes through in the images that I produce. So before I left, these are 4 items that I wrote down. I wanted to explore the ebb and flow of the tides that weave together a rich tapestry of colour and texture, creating a virtual playground for aerial photography. I want to explore the power of the seasons and the vast ephemeral floodplains that are punctuated with wild, twisted rivers. I want to explore a unique and rarely seen part of Australia. And I want to explore the deep and powerful connections of place with the Indigenous Australians. And at the end of that, what did I want to showcase? Well, I wanted to showcase a coherent set of images that speak to the untamed nature and wild beauty of the land. And hopefully, in an hour or so's time, I can confidently say that I've achieved that. So fingers crossed, and I might leave that with you two to judge.
You're hired.
So I guess the other thing too, Tim, is it's always a journey anyway. So whether you're there yet or not, it's you've still got plenty of years in the tank there to keep it going and finding some new gems there.
That's it. So in terms of the areas that I was interested in, now we've got a map of the top end. So what I would consider the top end, and I might be wrong in saying this, but Catherine's located here. East Arnhem Land's up here. So this all is the top end. The triangle that Paul was alluding to before is between Catherine, Jabiru and Darwin. So anywhere up here, I believe you could confidently say is the top end. So this was the short list of areas that I wanted to explore. Top of the list was the Tiwi Islands, which is located up here, about 80 kilometres north of Darwin. There's a chain of 9 islands. The 2 main ones there are Melville and Bathurst. And here's one for the trivia buffs amongst us. Melville Island's actually the second largest island in Australia to Tasmania. So whilst it may not look massive, it's a big considerable chunk of land sitting off the...
yeah, I mean, you actually need a permit to even go there, and it's quite still highly traditional lived place.
The second
do you want to explain Arnhem Land to people, Tim? Like, to just the fact that it's actually really similar. It's a huge block of land that's run and managed by the Indigenous people, essentially.
First things first. So this this area shaded here in a darker green, that's Kakadu. That's Australia's largest national park. And the area that's shaded next to that in lighter green is called Arnhem Land. And Arnhem Land is Australia's largest Aboriginal Trust area. So I'm not sure how many actual areas of Aboriginal Trust or if it's one single trust area, but it's all Aboriginal Trust land. So it's quite a considerable part of the top end is all ALP, as they call it.
And Kakadu itself is actually managed by the Aboriginal people as well. It's almost like leased to us,
yeah,
to visit as a national park, which is also a bit unusual in terms of the national parks of Australia.
The second area that I've got identified there is Adelaide River. If you've ever flown into Darwin from any of the other capital cities across Australia, there's a big snaking river that you fly over, and that's the Adelaide River. Given that I'd spent kind of a lot of time in Darwin prior to arranging this trip, it was the one that you fly across in a 747 and you put your head out the window, and that looks really cool. So I've just included that on the list. The Alligator River systems flow north from the Kakadu Plateau. There's three major rivers that flow north from the Kakadu Plateau. There's the south, the east, and the west Alligator Rivers. Paulie, I know that's an area perhaps that you've explored a little bit more without going into any detail around where and when. The Victoria River flows west from the Katherine area. That was an area that if you've ever driven from Darwin across to Broome, as an example, you drive along the banks of the Victoria River for a portion. The Victoria River is quite I guess is what you'd call a sedimentary river. So it's really quite muddy. And it's one of the reasons why I actually didn't end up flying over it, was because I believe the colours that were to the east of Katherine over at the Roper River and Limmenbight area were actually a lot more striking than the kind of more earthy browns that you'd see over the Victoria River. The other areas of interest were Bynoe Harbour, which is a harbour located about 45 kilometres from Darwin City itself, and East Arnhem Land. East Arnhem Land was just off the radar because it was too far and too expensive for the time that I had to arrange. So after all that planning and all the time looking into those areas, I whittled it down into 2 flights. The first flight was the Tiwi Islands, and then down south into Bynoe Harbour as one flight out of Darwin. And then the second flight was out of Katherine over the Roper River and Limmenbight River. And I'll take you through both of those flights in a little bit more detail shortly.
And those other spots on the map, are they maybe possible future plans as well?
I'd say definite future plans.
Yeah.
I'd love to shoot East Arnhem Land, but yeah, it's a bit of a mission to organise that one.
Yeah, it is. Like you said, permits. In terms of what I had to consider when I was doing the planning, the biggest the biggest consideration when you're talking about the Northern Territory is what season will I be shooting in? Now, I guess I caveat that by saying European Australians observe typically 2 seasons, being the wet and dry, with an optional third being the build-up, whilst local Indigenous Australians observe 6 seasons. And some of them have some really, really, really cool descriptions. One of them is called knock me down wind, when essentially describing the season of strong winds when the grass gets blown over. The season that I flew in is called, and I'm going to butcher this, so apologies to anyone that may be Indigenous or First Nations, but Ganoomaling, which is the season between late October and late December, and that's described as being hot, humid, thunderstorms, scattered showers with a tinge of green to the land, and water birds disperse as growth becomes more widespread. Traditionally, that's the season that the Indigenous people of Kakadu would retreat from the floodplains back up into the plateau, and they would find shelter in caves for the forthcoming wet season.
It's kind of it's the start of the build-up, they call it as well.
Yeah, it's so that's the optional third, is the build-up. So the Indigenous that is going to believe. So yeah, it's that kind of late October, early November timeframe. It's oppressively humid. Depending where you are, it's incredibly hot. So when I was down on my second flight over the Roper River and Limmenbight area, we landed at an Indigenous community called Nooka, and it was 45 degrees in the air, and by the time I hit the tarmac, it was well over 50 or 60 degrees in terms of just the radiant heat off the runway. And locals that live up in the top end often look forward to the wet season, because with the wet season comes the rain, and the rain often takes off the oppressive nature of just the relentless humidity of the build-up.
Yeah, people tend
Anything-
white
anything
people
else
tend
you
to go a
want
bit loopy that time of year.
Yeah, exactly. They all do, very much so. Another consideration for me was the tides. I wanted to make sure that, particularly on my flight over the Bathurst and Melville Island, the Tiwis and Bono Harbour, that the tides were doing the right thing, that would expose a lot of the sand beds.
So Tim, did you actually pick a more extreme time of low tide, or just you were happy with it was just low tide in general?
It was just low tide in general. It so happened that it wasn't a full tide, but it was getting close. So it was, I'd guess, probably 3/4 tide of the max.
And so, yeah, I mean, you said it there. They got some of the largest tides in Australia, 11 meters plus, I think.
Yeah, so it's 12 meters plus in the Kimberley, which has the highest tidal variations in Australia.
Further west.
A little bit further west. The interesting thing about the tides in northern Australia is they travel west to east. So the minute you get to Darwin, the tides start to dissipate somewhat. And once you get around to the other side of the Gulf of Carpentaria on the eastern side of the Northern Territory, the tides are a lot more subdued, just simply because the tides go west to east. So I think the max tidal variation in Darwin Harbour is about 7 meters, so it's still quite considerable, but it's not quite as extreme as the Kimberley.
And was another consideration perhaps any burning off or fires that could be, generating smoke and haze? And
yeah, definitely. There's a lot of the traditional land practices involve fire up there. A lot of the East Arnhem Land, Kakadu area is subject to Indigenous fire practices. So if you ever fly into Darwin, it's often quite hazy, and that's just in relation to when the Indigenous are doing a lot of their burnings. So it's often done towards the back end of the dry season, when a lot of the foliage is dry, which also crossed over with the time I was up there. Thankfully, there was a little bit of a little bit of rain before I flew, which helped manage fire and smoke as a consequence.
Wash it out of the sky.
Yeah, washed out a little bit. But it still was a little bit hazy, and I was able to shoot through it and fly at altitudes that was able to cut through it.
I guess that's
I've always found it really big issue.
More than top down too, if you have the smoke there, in terms of thickness at least. Yeah.
Like I remember a friend of mine was a ranger at Jabiru, and I was like, "Oh, can you help me figure out where the fire's going to be and where they're going to be lit the next day, so I can make a path around them?" And he just said, "No, the old fellas do whatever they want, and you just have a look, and they know what they're doing. They've been doing this for a zillion generations." So it's quite unpredictable, and a very big part of almost 4 or 5 months of the year. It's like having a shower on a Tasmanian afternoon is like having a fire in the Northern Territory. It's so normal and so common and so widespread. It's just a part of living. And that's really takes a bit of getting used to. And obviously it's a bit of an issue when you're trying to fly around stuff and you don't really know when it's going to be on fire or where it's going to be or where it's going to pop up the next day. So yeah, that's on the later end of the fires. Like they tend to be starting to thinning down a little bit sort of that time of year, especially into sort of November, December. But October, there can still be quite a lot.
I remember the reason why I'm so familiar with the Territory is my sister and brother-in-law live up there. They've raised 3 kids in the Territory.
Gotcha, yeah.
So my sister's a GP, and she used to do a fair bit of fly-in, fly-out work with remote Indigenous communities, including the Tiwi Islands.
Man, she was just
yeah, so she was able to give me a few inside tips in terms of where to go and what to see. She's not a photographer, so sometimes you've got to take that with a grain of salt. And my brother-in-law works in the construction industry up there, so they've been there for about 8 years, so they've got some pretty cool contacts in terms of being able to arrange flights and stuff. But just I got a bit carried away. So I remember the first time that I drove from Darwin to Katherine, where they were living at the time, and for about 3/4 of the way down, there were fires on the side of the road, and I found that quite confronting.
3/4, wow.
Never really been so close to bushfire like that, despite being well versed in the impacts of bushfire. but yeah, you just see these rogue fires burning all the way down to Catherine. But it's just part of the way of life up there.
Time to see some more pictures, Tim.
Yeah.
Flight 1, Tiwi Islands and Bono Harbour. This just gives you an indication from Google Earth of where I was looking. I don't intend to spend too much time going into that. I just use Google Earth and Zoom Earth to do my research in terms of where I wanted to shoot.
You just find whatever looks cool, isn't it, really?
Whatever looks cool. This was the tide that I shot on. So I shot a midday flight, and it was a 1 metre low tide. So that was the tidal variation that we're talking about.
Yeah, pretty low.
Pretty low, but it's most certainly not the most significant tide that they have. All right, straight into the images. So this one is a sandbar that's exposed at low tide on the ocean side of Bono Harbour. The runoff of the water exposes, a myriad of textures and colours. Fishing in the territories are huge. Their largest.
Risky.
Yeah. Activity. And the interesting thing about fishing in the territory is a lot of them go fishing for barramundi. The barramundi actually hide in the cloudy water. And when bait fish swim past, they'll leap out of the cloudy water into the clear water. So you'll see a lot of fishermen hanging around the colour differentiation or zones like this.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And that's where the barramundi hide. So that's real colour. That's all just silts in the water. And the reason why the barramundi like it is that's where they're kind of camouflaged and they're hidden in that water. This one for me, I guess, is all about colour and texture. There's all sorts of texture going on. You've got texture in the sand, you've got texture in the silt, you've got the exposed sandbars, you've got different texture in the water, the deep blue towards the right-hand side of frame, and then just the gradients of finer and finer silt when you get in towards the white there. It's one
Great
of
S curve there as well.
Yeah, it almost looks like a prawn. I heard someone say.
Yeah, prawn crackers.
Prawn crackers. Maybe I'm crackers. This one here is just the retreating tides. So Bono Harbour's got about 5 or 6 islands dotted on the perimeter of the actual harbour. And this between the islands, there's what I guess you'd call a reef system. This is just the extreme tide rolling off the reef that would be here on the left-hand side of frame, flowing out just to the sea. What I love about this particular frame is just the balance between the cool aqua colours in the top right-hand corner all the way down through to the kind of warmish tones that are on the exposed reef. A
question for you. Like if you're shooting somewhere like Roebuck Bay, they say there's a fair difference between the ebb of the tide when it's low coming in as opposed to when it's going out in terms of its interactivity with the flow and the silts. Have you got anything to say about that?
I don't. I have intended to shoot Roebuck Bay, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that may be specific to Roebuck Bay.
I was just kind of wondering because
so I shot this at absolute low tide, and I mean I was more than happy with the colours that I achieved. But if anyone's wondering what Paul's talking about, I think the ideal tide to shoot Roebuck Bay is trying to find a low tide that lines up with first light and then shoot about an hour afterwards.
Yeah.
So,
because it can push the murkier waters and the clearer waters into different places with each other. So I wasn't sure if that was as applicable around there. That's kind of what I was asking.
Yeah,
I'm hoping to be here in a couple of months.
I wish I had an answer to that question. I just all I know is the 2 hours I spend in the air, so I'm not that familiar.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, in terms of your approach, Tim, are you quite a traditionalist in terms of your aerial work in the sense of colours, or are you more interpretive and like to have treat it more like a canvas, I suppose, that you can work from?
No, I'm probably more towards the naturalist side of my processing. I don't push things too far. So a lot of what you'll see hasn't necessarily been warped or distorted. The colours are, if they're not absolute true to life, they're pretty close. It's just a matter of teasing out what's there. So if I talk specifically to this image, the most work I did was trying to pull out those oranges in the bottom left-hand corner. I was pretty subtle with it, and I could go a lot further, but there's a certain competition that I entered this image into that's got limitations on processing. So I tried to keep that as natural as possible.
Oh, great.
So Tim, you're shooting a lot of these so far on 110 mils. So does that mean you got a specific height that you fly at to get the kind of detail? And
I knew that question was going to come forward. So for everyone, 110 mils on the GFX 100 is equivalent to 87 mils on a DSLR.
87. Okay. Yeah.
I typically like to fly at 1,500 feet and adjust from there depending on what I'm shooting. This particular flight, my instructions to the pilot would stay around 2,000 feet because the geography of the land was so vast that I just felt like I needed to be a little bit higher than what I typically should.
Just to give you a bit more foresight to see what's coming, or?
Yeah, a little bit, perhaps. So this one here is one of the alluvial floodplains that's on the south side of Melville Island, an area that I know a couple of other photographers have flown over. This one, yeah. I was trying to say it without giving as much away.
Oh, mate, I think 5 out of my last 8 posts have been from the Tiwi, so it's all good.
Yeah, I know, and I think it's the exact same floodplain, mate. A little bit of
it'd never be the same. It'd be different every time.
That's kind of the cool part, isn't it, as well?
It's very much the cool part because, I mean, if you looked at Paul's photos compared to mine, they look incredibly different, and it's very much a consequence of the year that we flew. I don't know when you flew, Paul, but there was obviously a lot more either tidal impact or wet season impact. I'm not sure which one it was, but there was certainly a lot more water on the floodplains than what I was able to capture.
And I've noticed you've been targeting 5.6 as your aperture. Is it like a f4 and you've sort of stopped it down a little bit to get a bit more sharpness, but still allow enough light through kind of scenario?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah.
I shoot on the GFX 100. I shoot in aperture priority mode. I try and prioritize my shutter speed above anything else, and I try and prioritize my shutter speed to anywhere around 2,000. And in doing so, I either adjust my aperture or my ISO. More often than not, it's the aperture, but I try and keep it somewhere between. Well, you can go as low as 2.8. I mean, it really doesn't matter when you're shooting top down, because the focal plane's flat. But I try and keep it between f4 and say f8, depending on the light.
And all of these settings are pretty much indicative of high light, because you might be able to pull these off.
Yeah, this was a midday flight, so
I guess in lower light you'd be a lot more wide open, and the ISO might be up a bit higher.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
So what appeals to me about this image is kind of those vibrant reds that are in there in the middle of the bottom center of the frame. That's brought by what I assume to be algae in what is quite a highly saline environment. So remembering that the time of year that I flew over this area was towards the latter half of the dry season. So it had 6 months or so to accumulate intensity in terms of the salinity without being dispersed by wet weather. So a lot of the colours that you'll see on my photographs, particularly on my second flight that I took over the Roper River, there were some really quite trippy colours that I was able to capture. But that's certainly a result of the salinity. Yeah, so this one to me, I guess, I see either a flame or a Christmas tree. It just depends which mood I'm in, I guess. I did a little Christmas post that had baubles on each of the branches.
Brilliant.
And it definitely looked like a Christmas tree then. To me now, that definitely looks like a flame. So I wonder what that says about what mood I'm in, but who knows. So this one here is the effects of low tide between. So if you look at Bathurst and Melville Islands on a map, whilst they're islands.
Was it near the mouth or was it a fair way up?
Yeah, so it's near the mouth, but if you look at Bathurst and Melville Islands on a map, it almost looks like one island with a river that runs between the two.
Yeah, it does.
But it's actually the ocean. So this is towards, I guess, what you would call the mouth of the river. So on the ocean side, at absolute low tide, so you've got the vast extent of the seabed that's exposed, and then all the water that's concentrated in the channels. And there'd only be 1 or 2 meters depth on those channels. So the kind of really vibrant aqua turquoise colors come through, and that's, again, true to life, those colors. So to me, that's just almost like a brush. Someone's got a brush and just put it across the screen.
In terms of those colors, I don't know if it's just me, but I always seem to have an issue with when I'm processing that sort of intense blue, where especially if you convert to sRGB, it kind of goes out of gamut, and then it just looks kind of awful.
You have high-end are the worst.
Then the color balance is really hard too. So
so you have to go back in after the conversion and try and match it again.
Yeah. Well, I find the color balance between cyan and magenta really difficult to strike. But yeah, this one I saved as sRGB, and it managed to come through, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, good. Well, it's not just me then.
No,
I had terrible trouble with the Whitsunday, like Heart Reef and that kind of stuff.
It's
washing out.
Terribly difficult to get color. This one here, I guess, is a good demonstration of where the barramundi love to hide and where they do all their hunting. This is quite close to the initial image that I showed you, where there's quite these vast red sand beds that are exposed at low tide. Again, it's all about texture and color on this one. To me, that kind of looks like a wing of an eagle, or perhaps even fingers that are reaching out into the ocean.
I'm still trying to figure out getting compositions out of these shots of similar kind of beds. It's sort of you sort of look at it and your eyes start popping out of your head, and then trying to actually get cohesive compositions. It's like, oh god,
yeah, exactly.
It's not that easy, because there's such bizarre shapes often, and they don't necessarily just fall into a cohesive kind of line. It's quite interesting even now.
The other thing, Paul, is depending on, now I'm getting quite specific in terms of aerial photography. Once you've identified an area of interest, often you do what's called an orbit around that area of interest. And depending on the angle that you're shooting, it can look very, very different, whether that be light or the actual form of what you're photographing can look very different from different angles. This one looks very, very, very different compared to, the preceding 5 and the subsequent 5 images that I took of the same thing. But this one just jumped out to me because of just the kind of shape and how it kind of punctuates into the blue water, and the how you can contrast that really milky red water with the really iridescent blue.
So
what's the bit of silt on the end of that point there too, just coming off?
It looks like the wind blowing over, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I assume it's just the effects of tide. That's the direction of the tide.
So what's the native proportion of the files on the GFX?
Oh, good question. I can't answer it off the top of my head.
Is it like 4:3? Like,
Yeah, I believe that medium formats that aspect ratio 4:5.
I'm just looking at the cropping on your images and wondering if
it's close to 4:5 or 4:5. It's not exactly 4:5. I typically crop to 4:5, and most of my images are 4:5. Either.
There you
go. Either
Instagram ready, mate.
Well, yeah, but
I hate cropping my images to for Instagram. I hate it.
I've got a love-hate relationship. Mostly hate Instagram. This one is on, again, those alluvial floodplains. The alluvial floodplains sit probably a kilometre back off the shore of Melville and Bathurst Island. They're quite a vast area, big hundreds of hectares or acres in terms of its size, and it's punctuated by these creek systems that obviously at higher tides and or periods of rain collect all the water, and you get these really, really cool and interesting patterns. What I find fascinating about this one is just kind of the journey the eye goes on. It's very strong through the diagonal, and it kind of gives this really quite what I'd call bit of a rhythm to the image, so your eye can kind of follow it from top down and find some pretty cool, interesting things to look at, whether that be a mangrove or the creek line or a really interesting texture or color, etc.
Yeah, I really enjoyed finding that sort of green creek there when you sort of look further into the detail, and you can then realize how much detail is actually there.
Yeah, I've given that I've shot all these on the GFX 100. I've pixel peeped every creek line trying to find crocodiles, and I spent a lot of hours in doing that, and I didn't find one. But I did find some animals that I'll show you a little bit later on at 100%.
Cool.
So if people don't realize, he's shooting on a 100 megapixel camera here.
This one is a little bit, it's on the 110 mil, but it's a bit more of a context shot. So I included the mangrove tree line at the bottom of the frame. And then through the middle of the frame, we've just kind of got this really slow pattern that's caused by, the ebb and flow of the tide, and a bit of a creek line. And I think it gives a real kind of sense of rhythm and pattern to the image. I'll just go on to the next one. This one's an exposed sandbar. Again, I don't have a handle on the English language anywhere near as good as Paul, but I'd call this a nice, slow, sensual curve.
Nicely put.
And again, you've got these incredibly blue colors that are offset by some quite saturated reds.
Tim, here's a question. Notice how the ripples are quite a big feature of the shot. How much do you feel like the wind speed can influence your photography and in terms of ocean based? I mean, do you like to have some to give a bit of that texture? Or you prefer
I do.
Smooth, or?
I really do. I think it gives just a bit of tactile nature. So it gives a bit of texture to an image. I think if it were just calm, it wouldn't quite have as quite a tactile nature. So yeah, it all depends really. But this one, I think it almost makes the image.
Yeah, there's like a canvas sort of feel, doesn't it? Or that with that sort of overall texture going through it. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, we've got one of these alluvial floodplains. It's actually a different angle on the one that I showed you earlier. And I guess this goes to show that a different angle can produce a different image. So this one, whilst the other one looked a lot more red in terms of its color rendition, this one's a lot more yellow and blue. And where I took this with the editing was just to try and tease out a little bit of the blue, just to offset the yellows, given that they're contrasting colors on the color wheel. It kind of offsets the yellow and makes it a little bit more punchy. And again, it's got a really strong kind of diagonal nature to this image. This one's a really interesting one. There's a couple of these dotted around Darwin, but what the locals call them anyway is a blue hole. And these blue holes are a geological feature that are carved out of the rock shelves that are exposed at low tide. So at high tide, you wouldn't even notice it. It's there. You'd probably see it on a fish finder or something because there'd just be a giant hole at the bottom of the sounder. But at low tide, the rock shelf is exposed, but then you've got this pool that's probably 40 or 50 meters deep that collects all the water and is just, I guess it contrasts against the real texture and color of the rock and kind of really punctuates the image. I've got another one of those that I'll show you a little bit later. Interestingly, the local fishermen also use them. So when they're fishing out on a long, hot summer's, I guess, dry season day, they, at low tide, will purposely put their vessels in these blue pools because it means crocodiles can't get in. And what they do is they actually just go for a swim so they can cool down. And it's the only area where you can really swim safely without worrying about a crocodile.
Yeah, right. That is a rare experience up there.
Yeah. This is between Bathurst and Melville Island again. So we've got the seabed that's exposed and then just the collection of water in between. I feel like it's quite painterly, and again, it's that really iridescent blue. This one is above one of the alluvial floodplains, and really spoke to me. That red colour almost stood out like a stop sign when I saw it from above. I'm not sure whether that's a spring or whether that's a water buffalo wallow, but it's certainly the result of salinity in the water and the impact of what algae has. So, Hutt Lagoon over in WA has similar colours, and that's a result of beta-carotene algae in the water. I suspect, I strongly suspect that's something similar here. So it's an algae that's reacting with the salt content in the water, and it gives something that's really, really cool. And it stood out against that really kind of just nothing kind of alluvial floodplain. This one was on the way to the Tiwi Islands. It's an area called the Vernon Islands. The Vernon Islands about 50 kilometres northeast of Darwin. And again, this is one of those blue pools. So that's kind of the refuge of many fishermen when they're out there fishing for pelagic species and the big open water fish. But again, it's all, to me, it's all about the exposed rock shelf at low tide and just these really cool blues that offset that yellow in the rock. This one was a really interesting feature that I really wasn't expecting. It's kind of a yellow, green, lime green creek that it just kind of appeared in one of the floodplains below me. All those tracks that kind of intersect the creek line there are all water buffalo tracks, and they've got quite a significant bovine problem up there that primarily water buffalo. And I thought this was quite cool, seeing it from above, something that I certainly didn't expect. Again, that's the creek line that I showed you earlier, but taken from a different angle. Goes to show the angle of light, depending on where you are in the orbit, produces very different colours. This one's a lot more washed out compared to the other one. I certainly prefer the other image, considering that it's got more of an earthy, warm tone to it.
Tim, do you feel like you have to have your shutter speeds higher with such a big sensor and full?
I do to an extent, Paul. For me, it's an insurance policy. The image stabilization on the Fuji GFX 100 is an incredible bit of hardware. I actually haven't had any soft images at all, even when I'm shooting at lower shutter speeds.
You tend to lock off your focus, or you still shoot auto?
I'm shooting autofocus.
Yep.
I shoot native glass on the Fuji.
What was that? Sorry,
I hear that.
I shoot native glass on the Fuji.
Okay. Yep.
So the autofocus is really snappy. This one again is one of the small tributaries that's created at low tide around Melville and Bathurst Harbour. Island. For me, it's all about that electric blue that's kind of weaving through, and you've got all those little side tributaries that are feeding into it.
It's intense.
It really is intense. I'm not sure if I've clipped those colours or not, but I might have a look at the histogram when I get back. This is another angle on that big sandbar that I showed you earlier. Again, different angle, different elevation, different image. For me, this one's more about the kind of the milky blues and the deeper blues, rather than kind of the texture and the colour that was from the other angle. This one's more of a demonstration of what water buffalo do to those floodplains. This image, if you blew it up to 100%, you'd be able to pull out all of the individual hoof marks. But yeah, it's a real kind of feast of texture when you look at it at full resolution. We're getting close to the end of this part of the presentation. This is just to show the massive tidal variations. Again, a bit more of a context shot, including those mangroves in the bottom left-hand corner. And this one's all about shape to me. So shape's one of those things that you can take advantage of naturally occurring features in the image, such as a line of a creek, or in this case, the line of a sand dune, that create those shapes which creates a path for your eyes to kind of journey through the image. To me, that's like a crashing wave, or I know the surfer and you might see that, Paul.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll let you guys guess what the last image is of. But to me, that's Love Island. So it's just a little island in the middle of a floodplain that I identified on Google Earth, and it's one of those things that actually seemed to be true to life when I flew over it. So I told the pilot, he thought I was a little bit crazy. I said, mate, there's a love heart down there. Can we do an orbit around it? Whereabouts? But yeah, it was definitely a love heart. And then all these animal tracks that lead towards the island kind of really bring your eye into it. So that just, I guess, brings the first flight to a conclusion. Have you guys got any questions, or you want to rip straight into the second flight?
Oh, yeah. When are we going the next?
Yeah, no, it was absolutely fantastic, Tim. Thanks for that. I'm very keen on this one, though. I've seen some of this work, and it's
I have not been here, so I was pretty excited when I knew Tim was heading that direction before he went up, and
I actually alluded to this flight last time we did the aerial special. So I had originally planned to do this in August last year. COVID being COVID, drew a line through those plans, and I had to come up with an alternative plan. Then we went into the second lockdown, et cetera. Then thankfully, the Northern Territory government opened up the borders towards the end of October. And I was able to, first things first, see my family that I hadn't seen for 12 months beforehand, thanks to COVID. But then secondly, also arrange this flight. Now, how did I come to know about this area? Well, firstly, I'm a bit of a geography nerd, so I was aware of the Limmen Bight National Park. But secondly, I mentioned earlier that my sister and brother-in-law have lived in the Territory. My brother-in-law has actually fished on the Roper and the Limmen Bight rivers. And when I mentioned to him that I was looking in arranging a flight, back in August, they were living in Katherine. So my brother-in-law made a couple of phone calls, and within 5 minutes, I had a call from the boss of Katherine Aviation to talk about some pretty cool things that he's flown over. So I guess it often helps to have friends in places sometimes.
Sure does.
And then once it was mentioned to me that there was some pretty cool stuff out over the Roper River and the Limmen Bight River, it piqued my interest, and I spent, I guess, the best part of a week kind of trawling over some Google Earth images and the like. And I guess the next half hour or so is the result of that work. So the Limmen Bight and Roper Rivers flow east from the Katherine area. So the headwaters of the Roper River are actually in a place called Mataranka. Mataranka's on the tourist path in the Northern Territory. It's really well known for its hot springs. So you might have seen photographs from Bitter Springs and Mataranka hot springs. There's some really cool hot springs, but that's all in the headwaters. That's about 450 kilometres to the west of the mouth, which is the area that I was really interested in photographing. Once I got in contact with a Katherine Aviation, I was able to have a chat with the chief pilot and come up with a bit of a plan of attack. I told him that I was really interested in the alluvial floodplains, the stratifications, the creeks, the rivers, et cetera, around the Gulf of Carpentaria. And we came up with a plan of attack. So we were to fly from Katherine to an Indigenous community called Nooka. That was about 300 kilometres, 350 kilometres, and which is about an hour at top speed, cruising at 10,000 feet in a Cessna 210. We were then to land in Nooka and prepare for the I guess what you'd call a scenic flight. So we'd take the doors off in Nooka. We'd refuel in Nooka if we had to, and then we'd do a circuit out of Nooka for 2 or 3 hours, land back in Nooka, and then jet back to Katherine. So for me, the considerations there were I needed a fast plane and a plane that had reasonable payload and could travel for 4 or 5 hours, something that was reasonably maneuverable so I could get over the areas of interest and take some pretty cool photographs. it was a long day in an aircraft, so cost was also a consideration. And I wanted to take the doors off for this because I wanted to make sure that I nailed the shots, all of which Catherine Aviation were really accommodating in doing.
210, Tim?
210, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some behind the scenes. That's my pilot, Sandon, taking off the door. We actually lost the pin to the hinge on the door on the tarmac in Nooka.
Oh.
So we had to do some bush mechanic work and craft a hinge pin out of a bit of wire. So the entire flight home, the door was held on by our shabby work. The middle image there is just our flight path with the GPS coordinates that we flew. If you were to zoom into that, you'd see there's a whole bunch of little circles, which is where we did orbits over some pretty cool areas.
Spaghetti flying.
Yeah, exactly. I talked to it earlier, but here's some of the Indigenous art out of Nooka. Nooka's a really interesting place. So the history of Nooka is that it was established about 100 years ago or 120 years ago as a missionary. So it was previously known as the Roper River Missionary. It has approximately 1,000 residents, all of which speak 9 different language groups. So the Roper River itself is the physical border between Arnhem Land to the north. Then to the south is the Limmen Bight National Park and another Aboriginal trust land called the Mara Trust. Interestingly, the Mara Trust, Aboriginal Trust land, was where the majority of the images that are coming up were captured over. I didn't actually do much research into the local Indigenous art before I flew. I did it when I came home and I'd already processed some images. And the minute that I went on to Nooka Art, and there's a website called Nooka Art, it became really, really apparent just how true to earth a lot of the colours, textures, patterns, etc. were. You'll even see here on the image to the left, there's birds, and a lot of that stuff is exactly what you see from the air. So as we talked to earlier, Paul, it's really incredible, just kind of the familiarity in this art that I see having flown over it. These two, so Maureen, this one on the left, this piece is actually called The Coast at Limmen Bight. So this is actually, she's a local Mara, from the Mara clan. And this, even some of the textures here with those kind of stripes, horizontal stripes, you'll definitely see in some of my upcoming images. The colours really speak to some of my upcoming images, the purples and the oranges, even the greens. And then this image here from Faith Thompson depicts 4 different seasons. And I think it's pretty easy to tell what they are. So these 2 seasons are part of the dry. This season here would be the build up, and this is the wet. I flew, as I said, over the build up. So a lot of the colours that I saw kind of speak to this panel of this artwork. And it's really fascinating to see how kind of true to life that image is as well. This is more of an oblique context shot, including the wing of the plane, just to give you an idea of the vastness of the area that we're flying over, how wild and kind of untamed the country is.
Is that the Roper there? Was that
no, that's just one of the tributaries that feeds into the Roper. So the Roper itself is a broader river than that one.
Yeah.
But this gives you an idea of when I talk about the alluvial floodplains, that's what they look like when you're kind of gazing out of the window. And when you get more intimate on them, like I do with my 110 mil, I guess the resulting images are kind of the 30-odd images that I'll shortly take you through.
Did you mix up the focal length at all, or you just stick with the one?
No, I stuck with the one. So I had 2 cameras. This camera was my Sony that had a 1635 on it, so I could take some of these context shots. But most of my, I guess what you'd call my art pieces were taken on the 110. And that's just something that I've always shot when I've shot from the aerials, is I quite like shooting with a fixed focal length. So again, this is just, you can see off in the distance how hazy it is on the horizon. that's just the smoke that Paul and I were talking to earlier. Into the images. So this one here is on the bottom right-hand corner of this image is a swamp. And at the end of the dry season, a lot of the salinity in the swamp is becoming to intensify. And that's why you're seeing quite vibrant colours come through, whether it be green, yellow, or orange. The grey areas there is all grass on the fringes of the swamp. And then where you get those orange stratifications that really kind of strike upwards in a really electric fashion, that's just where the water has seeped out of the swamp and across the floodplain. So this one to me is a real study in texture, because not only have you got that kind of really interesting texture in the oranges, but then once you get it into native resolution, you can zoom right into the kind of individual grass strands on the swamp. You can pick out some birds that are in some of the standing water in the swamp in the bottom right-hand corner. And you can even see a couple of car tracks that some of the Indigenous people, perhaps, when going out on country, they've just kind of driven through this scene. So this one, to me, I guess, either feels like an insect wing or perhaps even a flame coming off a match or something like that. This one's at the mouth of the Roper River, Luke. So this is more of an oblique shot. And this will talk to, I guess, the breadth of the river at the mouth. So this was quite, you know, this image would probably be a couple of kilometres across. So it's a really broad river. You can see the water coming off the riverbed there, and the riverbed's that kind of magenta-y red colour, and then all the silt is coming in and making these really kind of interesting swoops, like brush strokes, and then you've just got that really electric blue, like you saw on my earlier images from the Tiwi Islands. Again, this is a study of a standing swamp that is feeding out into an alluvial floodplain. This one for me is just a real symphony of colours. You've got everything ranging from orange to magenta to blue to red. You've got texture and form. You can even zoom in. There's a whole bunch of egrets that are fishing in here. You can even see the egrets where they've waded through the water. It's stirred up the water. The little white dots that you might be able to just make out here are all egrets fishing down this way too. And you can see the water buffalo tracks that are intersecting across the sea. And again, you can see, you know, mangrove and the like through here. So it's a real kind of, you need to see this one big just to really appreciate it all. And
but often you see such a range of colours in these sort of shots.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of almost becoming somewhat signature for me, is just exploration of areas like this that have different colours. And then it's just a matter of teasing them out and using them against each other just to make the image sing. But yeah, this was just an absolute riot of all things sensory.
Oh, now you're talking. Getting the lingo going, Tim.
Long time before I'll judge apples, mate. So this one here is taken along the coast. Now the coastline, I don't have any context images, but the coastline was really transient. What I mean by that is you'd look out over the coastline and it was not apparent where the coastline met the ocean, because there was such a huge area of transition. And then it wasn't really apparent where the horizon was, because there was so much smoke and fog on the horizon. So it just felt like the coastline was this one kind of ubiquitous just landscape that kind of went on forever. These creeks that are flowing out from the Limb Bight area out into the sea, this purple's all dried grass. This is all mangrove, and you've got this kind of slow, rhythmic, sensual curve that are coming out with these creeks.
Tim, what size memory cards are you using with a 100 megapixel camera and a massively long flight?
I had two 128s. I filled them both, and I had backup. So that was the most nervous part of the flight, was having to change over memory cards.
Yeah.
Were there, do you use SDs in that camera, or?
Yes, SDs.
Yeah.
This one to me is a bit like a John Olsen painting, kind of just a bit of a riot of, almost like paint splatter across a canvas. It's, to me, I tried to bring out kind of the green and gold nature of this, obviously being our national colours. The gold, I suspect, is a result of, again, really highly saline environment. The greens are more around where the mangroves are. But yeah, it was just kind of this real big riot of colour and gold and green. This was, I'll touch on it now. This is, you'll see these mangroves are all dead. And this is a result of the unfortunate consequence of climate change. So the area between Weipa in Queensland and Groot Island on the Gulf Coast of Northern Territory was subject to what's called the largest ever recorded event of what's called a Mangrove Dieback. In the summer of 2015, 2016, about 1,000 kilometres along the Gulf of Carpentaria was subject to the Mangrove Dieback.
Wow.
I've got some stats here. I might just read them out because it's really fascinating. I don't know where they are. Here we go. 7,000 hectares of mangrove died across 1,000 kilometres of coastline. So, which resulted in approximately 200 kilometres of coastline of mangrove was dead, which was 7% of the mangrove on the Gulf of Carpentaria all died as a result of the mangrove dieback. As I said, it was the most significant dieback event recorded internationally. And it's all the way from Queensland to the Northern Territory across the Gulf of Carpentaria.
Is it rising sea temperatures? What is the cause?
No, so it wasn't rising sea temperatures. It was unseasonably warm temperatures and unseasonably dry wet seasons, which has all resulted in hypersaline environments. So a lot of the salt has killed off the mangroves. But yeah, it was very startling to see from the air. And it was, you often hear about climate change, but not often do you see or feel climate change. And that was the single most most powerful experience of climate change that I've experienced. It was real. I mean, 7,000 hectares of dead mangrove.
How about the fires in the southwest of Tassie, Tim?
Oh yeah, that too. let's not go there, Leaky. Again, this one is where standing water from a swamp has seeped out onto the Uluru floodplain. So you've got all these stratifications and capillaries that have just kind of expanding across the extent of the floodplain. Again, you've got the hypersaline environment that's creating these really kind of blood red colours. So not only do you have the kind of the nature of capillaries or veins, but you've also got the colour of capillaries or veins kind of extending out onto the floodplain. So this for me is all about the texture, and I can't wait to see something like this printed, because it'll just be it'll be pretty full on. This one here is taken over one of the areas of the intertidal floodplains that was actually underwater. So that's why you see quite a green algae-ridden environment. It was then punctuated by this really salty island that has some dead foliage on it that really kind of look purple. So you've got that lime green and magenta opposites on the color wheel that look really quite cool. And then not only that, you've got the texture of the water buffalo tracks that are kind of cutting through the water. This one here is one of the tributaries of the Roper River that's just spilling out into a floodplain. Again, probably sound like a bit of a broken record, but it's all about color and texture. Yeah, it looks really quite cool. Almost looks like a donkey's tail or something with the texture at the end of it. This one again was underwater. This is an alluvial floodplain that's got, I guess you'd call it a creek line through it, but it's just this big, vast inland swamp that covers hundreds of hectares, and it's got these kind of creeks that cut through it that are intertidal. So the tide will fill these intertidal floodplains. It's a biologically, yeah, I guess is the right word. Really important area for dugong, for turtles, and really rare pipefish, which are a cousin of seahorses. This one's just a creek line. Again, I've tried to scan this for crocodiles, but I can't find anything, so I don't have anything to write home about. But it's all about that pattern and the really strong diagonal line. So you've got this kind of weaving, slow, rhythmic curve that cuts through the image. Again, you've got the standing swamp that's spilling out over the floodplain. What I love about this image, and you might be able to see it up here, but it's actually a whole bunch of egrets fishing, and you can see where the birds have actually stirred up the water. So yeah, you can actually see them at full resolution fishing, which is really quite cool. This one, I really love this image, and to me, it's all about two things: color and texture. The color, and again, I guess we don't need to go too far into color science, but magentas and oranges are opposites on the color wheel and very complementary. Not only that, you've got where the colors are, it's the result of the salinity in the water. Again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but the colors in this one really speak to the artworks that I showed you earlier. And I've heard this one be described as anything from looks like a melanoma, looks like anything like a biological mass under a microscope. It could be anything. It's really up to your interpretation. This one here is a inland swamp that's a real kind of explosion of color. The white there is all salt, so you can actually see the result of the intensification of all that saline water. It's it would have, I guess you'd call it ephemeral, so it would have filled during the wet season. Then throughout the long, hot, dry, it's evaporated and left this really kind of hypersaline environment, leaving kind of really cool, explosive red and orange colors.
One of my favorites so far, Tim.
That one? Yeah, I thought that's a bit of a Paulie Holland special.
Bit of a feathered mantle sort of feel to it.
So this is just it's just a creek line, but again, it's just that S curve that kind of goes through the middle of the image. Not only that, it's the green and gold colors that I spoke to earlier. I love this image as well. It's just kind of, again, slow rhythmic curve to it. The emerald creek that runs through it is all as seen. The colors were really quite special. And then it's offset beautifully by those golds on the floodplain. This was an example of the coastline. So when you fly along the coastline at low tide, it's just these big, vast, endless sand beds. Given that it's quite a little bit more sediment in the water, it's a little bit more of a milky color, which kind of dials back the contrast a little bit and gives it more of a kind of less punchy, but more kind of dulcet vibes. I like to call them tiger stripes, and it's just this really kind of repetitive nature of the sandbars that are exposed at low tide. Give it a real kind of slow pattern. It gives it, again, a bit of rhythm to the image. This is just more of an intimate shot of one of those stratifications that come out into the alluvial floodplains. It's just the result of where water has once seeped out and across the floodplain and then just dried. And it's a real study in texture, and all it is just sediment. This is probably my best image demonstrating the mangrove dieback. So this is, you'll see obviously in the top left-hand corner there, it's a mangrove, and quite successfully a live mangrove. And then through the center of the frame here, you can see where the mangrove has died. And you can also see where it's become hypersaline with all that white salt that's all just crusted around the trees. Given that they've obviously died. And then coming down here, you've just got all these dead mangroves. So this is unfortunately a consequence of human-induced climate change. And yeah, quite confronting when you see something like this from the air.
Almost looks like blood draining out of the scene down the bottom or something like that.
Yeah. Just another take on those intertidal areas of floodplains. This is all taken within the Mar Aboriginal Trust land, so it's quite an extensive area. And I'm sure it's an area that they use for traditional way of life, so they do hunting and whatnot across areas of land like this. And I just pulled back on this one a little bit just to provide a little bit of more context to the shot that I showed you earlier. So we've obviously got these islands, and then you've just got these creek lines that come through on the intertidal floodplain. This one here is an island in the middle of a floodplain. Again, the colours are all due to, I guess, the nature of being late in the dry season. All the tracks that run into the middle of the frame are from water buffalo. And if I were to zoom in at 100%, you can actually make out 4 water buffalo in a wallow. Which I found really, really cool when I first did my review of these images. I just thought that was mind blowing that you could, and that's the result of 100 megapixels.
So that's essentially why I was going to ask why you think all the tracks were leading to that spot, but obviously there was a good spot for them to have a bit of a cool down. Yeah,
it's exactly where they hang out.
Tim, can I just double check sort of the time of day and tide again you're aiming for this flight?
So tide was less of a consideration here. It was low tide, but much of these floodplains wouldn't be affected by tide. They'd more be affected by season. So if we were to fly over them now, being the end of the wet season, I'm sure this would all be underwater. The time of day that I flew, we left, I was up at 3 a.m. leaving Darwin, 3-hour drive down to Katherine, got to Katherine at 6 a.m. Flight from Katherine at about 6:30 across to Nooka. And then we're flying above here about 8 a.m. I'd say. So
early start.
Yeah, very early start.
Is that for a particular reason?
I just tried to make the most of the sun being lower in the sky, just so I could get a little bit more contrast across things like, get a bit more contrast on things like these tracks, etc.
Do you think the air would get a bit hazier as the day goes on as well? Like, there's a bit of an advantage going out in the morning just from an environmental perspective, perhaps?
I haven't thought about that, Luke, but I imagine from an environmental standpoint, yeah, you're probably right. It would get a little bit hazier in the afternoon. Again, this is just an example of one of the many areas where you've got these big swamps that just feed out onto these floodplains. So it's just got these endless textures and capillaries and stratifications that just come out.
Like almost fractals, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can hear the ever-present buffalo tracks there too. Yeah.
Yeah. This one here is more of a coastal image. It's where one of the creeks runs out into the Limmen Bight area, onto the Gulf of Carpentaria. I was in the air this particular day for about 4 or 5 hours, and this creek line was the only area that I saw evidence of human interference. So there was a group of fishermen just to the top of the frame that were fishing on the creek, and they were the only people that we saw all day. This is an example of those tiger stripes that I was talking about earlier. The whole coastline's like this. So you've got the, I guess, endless kind of patterns, sand dunes, I guess you'd call them. That's all just from the movement of tide, and then just kind of flows out into the ocean. So there was, as I said before, there was no real distinct delineation between where the ocean was and where the coastline was, and nor was there delineation between the horizon and the sky. So it felt like scenes like this went on forever. It was really quite
is it also kind of like what you were in one of those earlier indigenous paintings where they had that sort of the streaking?
Yeah, I showed you that had streaking.
Yeah,
the coast at limit height. That's exactly. Again, this is a demonstration of that mangrove dieback. So this is all mangrove that's just sat there dead. So if you were to zoom in, you can see all the dead trees, and then you've just got this really interesting kind of patchwork of colour that kind of intersects it all. I think we're getting towards the end. This one here is one of my favourite images that I captured. I feel like this one's got really quite strong balance. So you've got two diagonal stories. You've got the story from the top right-hand corner down to the bottom left-hand corner, which is where you've got kind of that swamp. And similarly to a lot of the images that I've shown you, you've got areas of really hypersaline water where it's kind of gathered in pools and evaporated throughout the course of the dry season and got really intense. So you've got this really intense orangey red colours. And then from the top left down to the bottom right, you've just got all these stratifications and fractals that kind of intersect out into the landscape. And again, you've got, I guess I was perhaps letting you down the garden path before, but you've got evidence of human interaction here, just with some tyre marks, obviously where some locals have taken their vehicle.
Almost like electricity arcing around 2 points, and then all of the energy moving out from there. Yeah.
Getting towards the end here, this one for me is just that big bolt of orange coming in from the right-hand side. A different take on that, the vertical orientation that I showed you earlier. I prefer the vertical orientation, but again, it's all about those same colours. The oranges, the magentas, the blues, the purples. And this is my take on the love heart from this flight. So we've got a love heart here. It's obviously a lot different to the other love heart that I showed you from Melville Island. She's dried out, and you can see huge amount of buffalo tracks feeding into it. So I suspect
a lot of creatures. I wonder what sort of time period those tracks are evidence of.
I suspect it would only be a matter of months after the wet season, once
that's what I was wondering.
Water starts evaporating. So, and before the ground or the mud dries out. So I suspect it's probably only a matter of either days, weeks, or even a month.
So that would have been probably wallows in there, and then they've dried out, kind of thing.
I'd say that was a big wallow, and it's dried out, and the buffalo have moved on to somewhere else. And this is just more of a context shot to show you that I haven't really played around with the colours that much. I mean, these oranges are really kind of there. And similarly, this demonstrates the extent of that mangrove dieback. So this would have been mangrove once upon a time. And unfortunately, it's the consequence of what we as humans have done with our planet.
And are you aware, based on sort of the looking into it you've done, like if you were to fly back there, would it be even worse? Like, is it still continuing from that perspective?
No. So the actual event of dieback occurred over the summer of 2015, 2016. So I suggest, Luke, that it's probably getting better. And the total extent of the dieback was probably at its peak in 2015, 2016.
I guess with the La Nina year we've just had, it probably would have helped a bit as well.
Yeah,
Yep.
I can't give you a definite answer because I've only been over to this area once. So I wish I could give you an answer by saying, I've seen it improve. I haven't seen it improve.
So they might still be alive when you go back, Paul. There you
go. And this is just, again, that coastline. So you've got that kind of tiger stripes and then just this nice creek line that's just running out into the open ocean. And that's a different take on that explosion colour. And I think this one's a little bit stronger, Paul, in terms of a little bit more contrast, a little bit more pop.
Yeah, it's got a little bit more dimensionality and scope around it, but just a painterly flame-like aspect to the other. It was a bit rawer, maybe. This is a little bit more refined and a bit more holistic, I think.
Thank you. So
thank you.
That's about 50 or 60 images in less than probably 2 hours. So I hope I haven't bored anyone.
Of course not.
No, I think so.
And you've got much more than the amazing shots that you've just shown us as well on your website, which is obviously right there in front of us. And I very much encourage everybody to go and be enthralled by all of the amazing patterns and landscapes that you've been able to photograph over the years. And it's definitely a joy to have a look, and it's very hard to leave and get on with the day after you've gone through all of those. So, and you've done great with the website too, Tim. It's
it looks beautiful, Tim. You look at it, another project, mate.
Thanks,
and with some of that work, you've obviously built some significant bodies there. Have you ever considered doing something like an exhibition or a book or aspects like that?
Very much so. In fact, I find that one of my driving forces behind doing what I'm doing is I'm very keen on producing a book. I'm not close to being happy with the content I have for that just yet. I certainly want to explore some new areas before I even contemplate putting something together. So that's kind of, I've got a bucket list in my mind of regions and areas I want to shoot before I start putting something together. And most definitely I'm keen on putting an exhibition together. So kind of watch this space, I guess.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Speaking of exhibitions, the Light Collective has an exhibition up right now. It actually just opened on Saturday night. And it might be the very final viewing of our Katitanda Lake abstract area.
Oh my God.
Ignacio Palacios opened it on Saturday night. It's at Phil Winston's gallery in Kiama in New South Wales, 12 Manning Street. It's open every day for the next 3.5 weeks until, well, a month from this Saturday just gone, which was the 13th, I think. So, yeah, up until 4 p.m. every day, I think. I would love to have been up there. It's I haven't sort of given the premise for the speeches to anybody else in the group yet. Or should I say the other way around? They always make me do it. So I'm quite curious to see how Iggy did. Apparently it was a lot of fun. And it's something else to see what somebody like Tim or any of the guys in the group can produce on an incredible quality machine. And to see them, meter and a half square, just printed to perfection is difficult to even describe the translation relative to just what we've seen on Tim's. Like, I looked at some of those and I was just like, oh my God, I just want to see that original file and just reach into it and just finesse all the details out of it, because I don't think you can really understand the quality and the depth and the fiber of these files that are produced on particularly the camera like Tim's, which is currently one of the best in the world for this sort of work. And it's I wouldn't say it's lost on the screen, but you really have no idea until you see it.
I don't think Zoom's really set up for high resolution aerial imagery, is it? So, unfortunately.
So, I haven't gone past 50 yet. I don't know. Did you start on the 50 and then upgrade, Tim? Is that right?
No. I started on 32 megapixels with my Sony.
So you jumped to the 100.
And I tripled it, yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, you know, you can go to Photoshop and quadruple it.
I think it's more of a downgrade from going from a Sony, but you know, we all have.
You have to say that, Luke.
Oh.
I don't want to let Paul toot his own horn. I've also seen that Lake Eyre Catacomb exhibition, and it really is one of the most incredible collective pieces of work I've seen. So if anyone is in the Kiama area, it's not a maybe, it's a definite. You have to go. It really opens your eyes, and it's some of the most incredible work I've ever seen. So get there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a pretty special body of work. It's has a very spiritual quality to it, and again, you know, in terms of the overlay Tim was suggesting about Aboriginal art, it's quite amazing when Indigenous people come in and spend time with it too. It's just, you know, they see things and feel things that we kind of intuitively feel, and they kind of know would be the way I'd describe it. Because, you know, as artists and landscape photographers and conservationists, we have our own connection with landscape innately and quite deeply. And you know, as Tim said, you make a plan, but at the same time, when you're out there, you're really kind of following your heart and the moment, and you're just drawn to what you're drawn to. And it's not always something you can explain. And as you can see from a lot of Tim's images, you can't often explain what that image is. It's a feeling, or it's just an abstraction. It's a moment. It sort of transcends words sometimes, and that's a beautiful reminder that nature is capable of communicating to us way beyond the literal, and without having to do that with a paintbrush in a split-second moment. It's quite an incredible part of aerial photography. It's not really much like it, to be honest, in terms of those aspects.
Now, Paul, before the show, or discussing, maybe we might quickly show some of our work from the NT, just to put a bit of extra context.
Yeah, I think we're allowed to if
yeah.
it's our show.
I would consider it not extra text, but an exclamation mark.
I'll go through mine a lot quicker than Tim's.
Yeah, I think maybe if we just spent like 5 minutes each, just indulging ourselves. But
yeah,
it's definitely it's all across the NT. I haven't had too much of I've shot a little bit over Kakadu and a bit around Darwin and probably more around the Red Centre. So it's nice to be able to provide a bit of yin to the yang, I suppose, in that sense. And Paul, you've done a lot up the Red Centre.
Watching how different artists interpret a similar place too is quite cool. So Tim's seen some of my work for some of those areas, and he's probably more aware, you know, how different his is. And now having seen his, it'll probably make me reflect on my work a bit differently, to be honest. You want to start, Lukey?
Yeah, I'll just pull up a few shots quickly.
Otherwise I'm ready to roll too.
Yep, no, it's all good. So let's see here.
Again, I'm gonna write Tom after this and ask him what his flight plan was today.
Right, so hopefully you can see my screen there.
Wow.
So that's yeah, I haven't actually published any of these shots yet, but I'm still working on them
for us, Lucy,
from a shoot that what was that?
Special for us, mate. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm actually not sure if I'm allowed to publish this or not, because there are some of the domes visible in the rear which you're not actually meant to photograph. So it's quite possible that's a big no-no. So I won't dwell on that too long. But it's pretty amazing being able to get this alignment then with Uluru in the background there, and a little bit more editing, and I'll be able to get more detail out of that. So yeah, it's amazing photographing Uluru at sunset. It's definitely the time of day to do it. And
rather than
sort of really enjoyed seeing the shadow being cast by the rock.
I was about to say, Luke, the shadow really makes that for me.
Yeah, and then you can actually see the faint outline of Mount Connor in the back, or Fuluru as people call it, because they think it's Uluru as they're driving in, but it's not. And I believe that's the coach parking area down there as well. And then I took a few other shots. It's really quite stunning, the dune system around, and then yeah, with the shadow there as well. So I wanted to go a bit wider just to show those dunes off as well. But yeah, you know, you can do a lot of different iterations of that. But I was also trying to get the that shadow to be a bit more centered. But I think maybe offset actually looks a little better. now moving, I'll keep with the reds. Oh, there's another Uluru one here. So this was one I took. This is actually a sunrise image. So it also shows that, you know, you don't getting the sun more coming in from the side. And so you don't really get the glow on the rock as such when you're doing that. And you can see that's the car sunset viewing area down there. And then, no, I do some top downs occasionally. And this is looks like a tree that had actually burnt out and it left an ash in the sort of same shape. And then you've got the lines drawing across there from the burn with some of the desert oaks left. And then you can see the spinifex here off in the top right. So it's one that I put on social media and didn't get much reaction, but I think if you know, it's more of a detail one, I guess, that you need to have a bit more explore of. And again, just the it might be the desert, but there's actually a lot of color out there. And it's a really incredible environment. So that's kind of the shots I had from around Uluru, again with the road snaking back to Cartajuda in the back. This is around the West McDonnell Range and Ormiston Pound, with Ormiston Creek winding through, and then you're looking back to Mount Sonder in the back, which is one of the taller mountains in the NT. Yeah, I've got a few different takes on that. It's a really stunning spot. I was actually able to fly a drone there too. I actually had a drone permit, so I was able to get some aerials also from that as well, and really found some ghost gums and with the creek behind. And yeah, Mount Sonder, which is quite a beautiful feature, and then a really nice view of the Pound that really just shows the geology of the area. You've got Ormiston Gorge coming through here, and the, you know, Crater Lake Pound right here in the back. So yeah, beautiful spot. It's the Fink River, also a drone shot which I captured with a permit, looking down towards Glen Helen Gorge. And then we've got, I can't remember the name of this gorge. I don't think might be Serpentine Gorge or something like that. And you can see the swimmers and the water hole there. And then moving further north, this was around Darwin as well. We went on a quick helicopter flight out of Darwin. This is the city from above, with the docks in the foreground and all the buildings behind, and basically showing a lot of the more touristy areas, I suppose, of the city. Yeah, and just a few other. I tend to, as you can very well see, do oblique shots, and I guess that's less artistic but more usable for tourism clients and things like that. So, and we actually found an area with some magnetic termite mounds as well, which is also really fascinating to photograph from the air, and depending on the different angles and the shadows that you get. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't have much time to work with this, but I could imagine. Yeah, like I really love the you know, it's almost like a cemetery or something like that from this sort of angle. So yeah, so that's my 5 minutes of fame. I'll pass it over to you, Paulus.
Oh yeah, 5 minutes always, mate.
I don't know how you're going to go in 5 minutes.
Well, we'll see. Where are we? Oh, where did that one go? Here we go. Yeah, and I kept it to a smaller set. A lot of these are really new, and I haven't really shown them. A couple of them I just put up on Instagram lately. Yeah, that's a totally straight shot. You know, like it's pretty much a raw file. You know, maybe a tiny hint of contrast at best. Just kind of hard to describe what you can find out there. Somebody asked me what. Assume this was a photograph of a piece of paper, you know, with brushstrokes through it. And yes, you've heard that before, but this one probably more literally than most that I've created, I think. Zipping along the Tiwi Island coastline here, these ones. Yeah, you just find these little features out of the water, just look like orchids or plants, or I don't even know what you call this thing, but it's pretty awesome. Someone said it maybe looked like an orchid. Actually, that just got posted tonight. Actually, that one.
That's so these would be similar locations to where Tim shot it. It's almost
Very
like
much so. That's
it's maybe a little bit more water around, maybe not quite as dry when you were shooting. Do you think?
I actually went slightly earlier in the season, but these are out. These particular ones are in the water. So
Okay.
So pretty much everything you've seen is underwater, just slightly offshore. So there's an example of, the under and over kind of overlay of the tides and the waves, and it's one of my favorite areas to play around in. And again, it's a little bit tidal. That's slightly inland on those similar floodplains, that alluvial plains that Tim was on, sort of around that area. And I mix it up like you, Tim. I 85 is probably my favorite length, and so I shoot at a similar height of like 2000. A lot of features like this out in the Vernons, as well as in the Bino Harbour. Quite alien, like, I see a lot of figures that almost look like stingrays or different sort of rays of different kinds. This is one of my favorites from the Tiwi coastline there. Actually, last night, Mark Adamus liked it, and then he followed me. So I'm like, yeah.
Hey, you've made it, Polly.
Are they Buffalo tracks there too?
Mark Adamus is following me. If anyone didn't know, a lot of people consider him to be one of the greatest landscape photographers in the world. And Marc Adamus, Adamus. Go and treat yourself, seriously.
You can actually see in these images that there's a lot more water on the floodplains when I shot it. So that's where
okay. Yeah, so mine are probably more dried out and they have a bit more intensity in the color maybe as well because of that.
More saturation in the
yeah, I went earlier in the season, so it was late dry season, so it was right at the end of probably the maximum time for it to dry out, really, before the rains even start. So that tends to add to the salinity and intensify, a lot of the colorings, I think. I'm noticing that Tom today, his flight was really, really wet, so it's going to be
really wet.
See what he got.
Wow, look at the texture.
Oh, texture heaven. I would have loved to have shot this on the GFX 100. But, I'll settle for my lovely Canons. They're doing the job. I think that's a straight raw file. I don't think we even touched that. Again, that's just a straight shot. That's kind of on some of the islands on the way over to the Tiwis. There's a lot of these kind of like platform reef shelves, and they're really, really subtle, but they have beautiful texture sort of floating around within them, and obviously wonderful sort of pops of color and alliterations. And yeah, that's in the Vernons, I think, on the way over this sort of set here. I can't actually remember where these are, but I found, some absolutely stunning sort of intensely orange sort of sandbanks in particular, similar to sort of what you found. But that's an example. That's a straight raw shot, straight out the window.
If you just go back there, Paulie. Not sure if anyone else can see it, but that's most certainly a face.
Mm.
Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, there's another one later that is, to me, almost like a guardian figure. Like you get these eerie feelings sometimes when you're flying over certain features. Like there's a presence. I don't know how to describe it, and who knows how you possibly can with a logical mind, but it's definitely a very real feeling sometimes. In some of these places, that's a straight raw file as well here. And yeah, some of them are just, again, quite hard to compose though. I did find it challenging. It might not come across that way, but it's certainly when I was flying over, because you've only got milliseconds to focus, and often you're baking over and the compositions change every second, and you might have missed it, or your lens might be too long because you're not high enough. And it's tricky that you think using fixed focal lengths, but when you nail it, it is so worth it.
It's pretty incredible to think that a lot of those are pretty much a straight file. I mean, imagine what you could do in a bit of...
Yeah, got him Cook on board with one of those, and you'll poke your eye out with a stick. I love you, Scotty. This is, again, it's alluvial floodplains. This is a little bit... is this further over? This is in the Kakadu. This is in the South Alligator, I think. East and south are my favorites. I haven't spent as much time in the west. I've certainly flown over the Adelaide River. But they had these just...
Wow, has the light.
Just dreamy features. And it's always a gamble when you get dappled with light, whether it's going to work for you or against you. And, when you get the combination right, it's very mysterious. That's a little bit more heading towards sort of Arnhem Land over a little way. This is a favorite one. It's almost like a tendon, you know, or just a sinewy piece of muscle or something.
Yeah, bony. Yeah.
It's out in the floodplains of Kakadu. This whole sits around Kakadu, I think. I think that's I don't know if that's Tiwis or Kakadu. This is another sort of guardian figure that I
Very much so.
and if you change it at different angles, if you look at it sideways, you can see almost like an owl figure in the center. You know, one wing and two eyes.
Oh, yep.
And other people see a shark or a porpoise sort of along this line with its nose coming out here. Like it's depends on who you ask and how you go. But
I see a cat.
Which one?
A cat.
Oh, a cat. There you go. Well, somebody saw something because I gave me a gold distinction in the Iris Awards. So thanks very much. And they're not easy to get in New Zealand, I'll tell you. Tiwis again, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, back to the Tiwis again. Go, giving all our secrets away, Tim.
We are.
It's going to be like just a flood of people flying over there willy-nilly.
Here we are at the top end again. Top end again.
Yeah, this is more intense. So this is more on those alluvial plains again of the Tiwis. And there's some beautiful areas just out of Darwin, actually, just on the top end of where the Adelaide comes to the coast that are a lot like this as well, actually. So you don't have to go too far. Again, this is in a little bit more in the floodplains of Kakadu, and you can see all myriad. I don't know, they're quite big birds actually. These ones, I'm not quite sure what but they're white. But if you have a camera like Tim's, you can go in and have a field day about what you find in terms of wildlife and different places.
Kakadu is home to 1% of all the migratory birds in the world.
Oh, 1%.
So, I mean, it's a very, very significant.
A huge amount, yeah. Wow, that's huge for the whole planet. Again, this is probably in the mouth of either the south or east alligator. I think maybe the east. I often find a lot of my favorite kind of fractal patternings are in those really sort of coastal.
With that one you had before, Paul, was there a consideration to do it either, was that earlier in the morning or something, just to get more of that sort of three-dimensional feel?
I stayed out as late as I could
on
this flight for that very reason. So you start getting, you notice those shadows and the depth and the shifts in coloration. And, it really does make a difference to the larger kind of more structural features like this, but a lot of them are quite flat. It's a little bit less so here, but there's still some. It still gives a little bit of depth and cleft. And if you can, it's sort of worth it. But often, it's an hour's flight out there or back. And so you're never actually going to be there at dawn or dusk because commercially you're not allowed to fly in the dark. So there's sort of compromises. This is a beautifully delicate one. This is one of my faves actually from a little while ago. Anyway, that's just a little taster for y'all.
Thanks for letting us indulge, Tim.
I'm still indulging in both of your work.
Well, let's keep indulging and let's get in a plane together, Tim. I'm chomping at the bit, mate.
So am I.
Yeah, grow little ones.
Oh no, we've got plans cooking.
It sounds very, very exciting. And Tim, you still do need to come down to Tassie and there's some pretty cool stuff down here.
Oh yeah,
aerial wise as well. So
yeah, there is. I've been doing quite a lot the last year. Actually, Luke's probably done as much as anyone the last year and getting paid to do it. Good man.
What I try to do is very different to what you guys do, but certainly have a lot of respect for being able to restrain yourself and shoot down like that when I'd just be looking at all of these beautiful oblique images and be going for that. So I think it's nice.
That's the beauty of what we do, Lukey, is we've all got different interpretations. So embrace that.
Yeah, I think that's why it was nice to just round out the show with some different eye and different focal choices and different angles, just to broaden people's scope, I guess, of what's out there. Like, I mean, being around with Luke, I've done a lot of oblique shooting this last year on some flights with Luke, which I wouldn't normally do, and I'm really enjoying them. So it just kind of reminded me to not get too sort of tunnel visioned about things.
Yeah, it's definitely what I enjoy is being able to provide a unique perspective on a pre-existing scene that people have seen a certain way for many times. And that's, I guess, the power of aerial photography, is being able to yeah, provide that alternate perspective, the bird's eye view, if you will, that yeah, it often has a lot more impact when you can see it that way, and maybe help to comprehend the sense of scale of some of these places that we're photographing. So yeah, it's very, very good fun, whether it's drone or from an aircraft. So
yeah, jury's out on the drone, says Tim.
No, I think he's got very valid reasoning there for why he'd go with the aircraft route. And yeah, there is a considerable amount of time investment in terms of upskilling to use a drone, and also getting the paperwork, and yeah, time and cost. And when you can just work with a very skilled pilot and get into the right place and have a 100 megapixel camera and pull off amazing shots, you know, I'd probably choose that too if I could. So brilliant. Well, look, thanks so much again for your time, Tim. I was just, I'm pretty sure that's the most detailed and well put together presentation we may have had. I don't want to cause controversy here, but yeah, it's certainly very appreciated.
Very well thought out, Tim. Thank you.
And we're really keen to see where you end up next, and your next adventures. And it seems like you're really sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit of places that people have been, and that's always a good thing too, to unearth some new yeah, some new interesting places, and yeah, it's always a joy to see.
Well, thanks very much for having me, guys. I mean, I was thrilled that you even thought of asking me in the first place. I'm buzzing that we've, you know, spent the best part of 2 hours talking about the thing that I love most. You guys, to reiterate the sentiment that I outlined at the start of the show, you guys have created such a special thing here, and I just can't wait for next week and the week after.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you're going to be a very hard act to follow, I can assure you. So thanks very much again, and we will be back same time next week. Hopefully we'll be able to be live next time. We'll see how we go. I'm hoping also to get into the bush next week, so that could be interesting to see how that works out. But anyway,
I'm going to be on some beautiful island somewhere doing some photography Wednesday. So Tim graciously gave us a spot and juggled a few things around so we could make sure we got him on the show this week. So thank you, my friend.
My pleasure.
Have the next time I'm seeing you, it'll be clicking my R5 next to your GFX, mate, out of plane window.
Crammed in a Cessna 172 somewhere above, somewhere.
Stay tuned.
Exactly.
Fantastic, guys. Well, thanks again, Tim, and we'll see you all guys next week. See everybody.
Thank you.
All right, everyone.
All right. Bye.